Life Stories is a collection of profound, real-life tales that explore the complexities of family, betrayal, and redemption. Today, we dive into the journey of Emma and Ethan, siblings bound by a shared history and torn apart by a shocking betrayal. When Ethan secretly sells their family's farm, Emma is forced to confront a web of lies, secrets, and deep emotions. But as the story unfolds, a plan set by their grandfather gives Emma a chance to reclaim what was lost. And in the process, both siblings find a path to healing. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the call came. I was sitting at my desk in Austin, working on a research report about sustainable agriculture practices, a topic that consumed most of my life these days. The hum of the office was familiar and comforting, the routine of spreadsheets and data analysis grounding me. Yet, in the back of my mind, something felt off. I hadn't heard from my brother Ethan in years. Not since he'd left for his next big thing, chasing business ideas and fleeting dreams. We had drifted apart, each of us too wrapped up in our own worlds to stay connected. But this time, when my phone buzzed, the name on the screen gave me pause. Ethan. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen, almost letting it go to voicemail. But something inside told me I should answer. Maybe it was the instinctive concern of a sibling. Maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, he was still my brother. I tapped the screen. Emma. His voice came through the phone. Casual but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. I think you should know. I sold the farm. For a moment, I froze. The words didn't quite register. I'd heard him wrong, surely. I could almost hear the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet as if everything had suddenly stopped around me. You what? I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. The farm, Emma, he repeated, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. Grandpa's farm. Sold it for $3 million. Got a decent deal, I think. My heart sank. Grandpa's farm, our family's land. The place where we spent countless summers. Where the dust from the long days of working the soil seemed to seep into our very souls. It wasn't just land, it was everything. The laughter of our grandfather. The smell of the horses and fresh earth. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees in the evening. It was where we'd both learned who we were. What it meant to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And now, it was gone. Just like that. You sold it without even telling me? My voice was sharper than I intended. I didn't recognize the anger rising in my chest. Ethan's response came with a sigh. As if my shock was an inconvenience to him. Look, Emma, you haven't been back there in years. You've got your career in Austin. Your research. The farm was just sitting there, collecting dust. I figured it was time to move on. I could barely breathe. How could you do this? How could you just sell it? I stammered. Relax, Ethan replied with a hint of annoyance creeping into his tone. I'm the executive. I've got the right to make those decisions. And anyway, the money, well, I spent it. I felt the blood drain from my face. Spent it? What do you mean? You spent it? He didn't miss a beat. Olivia, my girlfriend, her business needed a boost. She had this opportunity, and she needed the money fast. So I helped her out. It was a good investment. Emma, I couldn't process the words. Grandpa's farm, our family's legacy, gone. Sold for a fraction of its worth. Also, Ethan could throw the money into a business venture with his girlfriend. A business that hadn't even been his. I felt betrayed, not just by his actions, but by his complete lack of remorse. His disregard for the past. For everything that farm represented to our family. To me. You sold the farm for half of its real value. I said, my voice shaking now. And you blew the money on Olivia's business? Do you even understand what you've done? Well, he said, defensive, you don't need the money. Emma, you've got your career, your research. What's the big deal about an old farm? Anyway, the words cut deeper than I expected. It's not just an old farm. Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's Grandpa's legacy. It's everything we've known, everything he worked for, and you just threw it away. I ended the call without another word. I couldn't trust myself to speak. My mind was racing. I felt nauseous, dizzy. How could he do this? Ethan had always been reckless. Sure, but this was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just bad judgment, it was a betrayal of everything we stood for. Everything Grandpa had built for us. And worse, he didn't even see it as a problem. He didn't understand the gravity of what he'd done. I couldn't just sit there. I immediately booked the next flight to Dallas. I needed to be there. To understand what had happened. To find out if there was anything I could do to fix this, though deep down, I knew the damage was already done. As the plane took off, I sat by the window, staring out at the sprawling landscape below. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. How could Ethan betray us like this? And how could he be so cavalier about it? Was he really that blind to what he'd done? I landed in Dallas late that evening, my anger simmering just below the surface. But the closer I got to the farm, the more that anger shifted into something else. Something deeper, something that felt like a challenge, one that Ethan didn't even know he had set for me. The next morning, I drove from the airport straight to the old farmhouse, my heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. The land looked just as I remembered. Or at least I tried to remember it. The overgrown grass and weeds choked the once pristine fields. And the barn, which had once been a place of so many memories, now stood in disrepair. The house, too, seemed to carry the marks of neglect. Its walls faded, its windows dust-covered. It was heartbreaking. But I wasn't here to mourn, I was here to find answers. I drove into Dallas, to the office of Walter Bennett, our grandfather's lawyer. He had been a constant in our lives. A trusted advisor who had known Grandpa longer than anyone. I had always admired Walter's calm demeanor, his quiet strength. Today, however, I needed something more than just guidance. I needed to understand how this could happen. How Ethan could have sold the farm and walked away so easily. When I walked into Walter's office, he was waiting for me. His sharp eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of recognition in them, as if he had been expecting me. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Walter, Ethan sold the farm. He did it without my consent. He says he had the right to do it. Is that true? Walter sighed, his fingers tapping rhythmically on a thick folder on his desk. Yes, I received the notice yesterday, he said. But, Emma, there's more to this than you realize. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What do you mean? Your grandfather wasn't just any man, Walter said slowly, his voice steady. He was meticulous. He knew the value of the land. Not just in dollars, but in what it meant to you both. And he foresaw something like this happening. I looked at him, puzzled. What are you saying, Walter? He slid the thick folder across the desk to me, his fingers tracing the edge lightly. Your grandfather amended the estate documents 2 weeks before he passed. He explained. He filed an amended deed that includes a safeguard. If either of you attempted to sell the farm without the other's agreement, ownership would automatically transfer to the wronged party. My heart skipped a beat. Wait, you're saying the sale is void? Walter nodded. Yes, the sale is void, Emma. The farm belongs to you now. I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. How could this be true? How had I not known about this safeguard? How had Ethan not known? Does Ethan know about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No, Walter replied, his tone firm, and I'd advise you not to tell him until we have a legal meeting. This is a delicate matter. I sat back in the chair, my mind spinning. Grandfather had known Ethan's weaknesses, his impulsiveness, his need for instant gratification, and he had set up a plan to protect the farm. But it wasn't just about the farm. It was about family. It was about protecting what truly mattered. I clenched my fists. So what now? Walter checked his watch. Now you get ready, because once Ethan finds out, he's going to fight this. And something tells me he's not going down without a scene. I drove back to the farmhouse later that afternoon, my thoughts consumed by everything Walter had told me. It wasn't just about the farm. It was about trust, betrayal, and the deep love Grandpa had for us, even when we couldn't see it. That evening, as I stood in the overgrown fields, I realized that Grandfather had planned for this moment. He had known that Ethan and I would one day have to face each other, that we would have to make hard choices. And in the end, he had given us the chance to make things right. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with the events that were about to unfold. I had been running on adrenaline for hours, my heart pounding as I prepared for what was next. The relief from Walter's revelation was still fresh, but I knew that this was only the beginning of the storm. Ethan had no idea what was coming. He had sold the farm without a second thought, believing he had won, but now, I was about to turn everything upside down. And I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that this confrontation would change everything. I met Walter in his office just after 10 a.m. He had already arranged the legal meeting. And Ethan, I corrected myself, would be there, along with his lawyer. Walter's calm demeanor hadn't wavered since I had spoken with him the day before. He was unfazed by the family drama that was about to unfold. I, on the other hand, wasn't so composed. My hands were slightly clammy as I gripped the chair in front of me, waiting for Ethan to arrive. Ethan was 20 minutes late. Of course, he was. The arrogance that had been part of him for as long as I could remember seemed to stretch and grow with every passing minute. When he finally strolled in, wearing a designer suit and a smug grin, I almost couldn't believe it. He looked like a man who had won a battle, a man who thought everything was in his control. Olivia, his girlfriend, trailed behind him, a bored expression on her face, while his lawyer, a young man who barely looked out of law school, shuffled in nervously behind them. The contrast between the two was stark. Ethan, still brimming with arrogance, and the lawyer, obviously overwhelmed by what was happening. Ethan caught sight of me sitting across the table. A smirk played on his lips. Well, Emma, he said with exaggerated nonchalance. Didn't think you'd care enough to show up. But here you are. I met his gaze coolly. Sit down, Ethan, I said, motioning toward the empty chair. He reluctantly dropped into the seat, still wearing that cocky grin, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Walter cleared his throat, cutting through the tension. Ethan, he said, his voice even, I assume you're aware that Emma has concerns regarding the sale of your grandfather's farm? Ethan rolled his eyes, clearly bored with the whole situation. We've been over this, Walter. I was the executive. I had every right to sell it. Walter, however, wasn't swayed. He slid a piece of paper across the table toward Ethan. The air in the room thickened. I could see the shift in Ethan as he reached for the document. His eyes scanned it quickly, but the smug look on his face faltered. His hands tightened around the paper, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years, real fear. What is this? Ethan's voice was no longer confident. It was shaky, confused. Walter steepled his fingers. That's the amended deed your grandfather filed 2 weeks before he passed. It contains a character clause stating that if either of you attempts to sell the farm without the other's agreement, ownership would automatically and irrevocably transfer to the wronged party. Ethan stared at the document, his face draining of color. No, that can't be right. But it was. I felt a surge of triumph inside me. Grandfather had been one step ahead all along. He had seen Ethan's greed, his impulsiveness, and had prepared for this moment. I think it is, I said, my voice steady. The moment you signed that sale agreement, Ethan, you lost everything. The farm belongs to me now. The room was silent for a long moment. Ethan, now pale, slammed the document down on the table, frustration radiating from him. This is a setup, he shouted, his voice rising. Grandpa wouldn't do this to me. Walter remained calm, his gaze unwavering. Your grandfather knew you well, Ethan. He knew you would act this way, and he planned for it. He didn't trust you with the farm. I met Ethan's eyes, and this time, I felt no bitterness, no hatred, just a deep sadness. You didn't just lose the farm, Ethan, I said softly. You lost the family's trust. For a brief moment, it seemed as though something shifted in him. His bravado cracked. But then he turned to his lawyer. His voice frantic. Do something. This isn't happening. This can't be real. His lawyer, who had remained silent throughout, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Legally speaking, the amendment is binding. The sale is void. The farm belongs to Emma. Ethan stood up suddenly, pushing the chair back with a screech. What the hell am I supposed to do now? He yelled. Frustration and panic clouding his voice. I didn't respond immediately. I watched him, finally understanding that this wasn't just about the farm. It was about his desperation to hold on to something that wasn't his. About his need to control a situation that was far beyond him. And it had cost him everything. Olivia, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice sharp. So, what does this mean? We've already spent the money. It's gone. What now? I met her gaze with a coldness that surprised even me. That's your problem, I said. You and Ethan made your choices. Now, you'll have to face the consequences. As Ethan stormed out of the room, followed by Olivia, I sat in silence, the weight of everything finally starting to settle. I had won, legally. At least, but something inside me knew this wasn't over. There were more layers to this story. More hurt and regret that hadn't yet been addressed. I couldn't help but think of Grandfather Jack. The man who had always believed in second chances. The man who had known that life would throw challenges our way. And somehow, even from beyond the grave, he had ensured that redemption was possible for us both. I stepped outside into the cool air, the sun setting over the land that was once so full of life. I realized that what I had fought for wasn't just the farm, it was the chance to heal. To rebuild, and to understand my brother once more. The anger and betrayal I'd felt had given way to something more complicated, empathy. Despite everything Ethan had done, he was still my brother. And no matter how many mistakes he made, I couldn't turn my back on him entirely. A few months passed, and the days on the farm became filled with hard work, shared moments, and quiet realizations. Ethan didn't give up. He worked alongside me, learning the value of the land in ways he'd never considered. And slowly, I began to see the change in him. Maybe this was the second chance Grandfather had planned for both of us, a chance to grow, to rebuild, and to finally understand the true meaning of family. As we stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to him. You feel different, Ethan. He nodded, a genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Yeah, I think I do. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. To stay updated with more life-changing stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for being part of our journey.